Inside these prisons, there's no robe, no cross, and definitely no mercy. Here's what goes down when KKK members get locked up. First up, a misguided young man who wanted to spark a race war. Number 6. Dylann Roof was a 21-year-old from South Carolina with strong white supremacist views. He dropped out of high school, bounced between jobs, and spent most of his time online reading racist propaganda.
Getting to see this admitted racist and accused killer at target practice. Police say 22-year-old Dylann Roof recorded himself at home using the same .45 caliber Glock he's accused of using in the shootings.
On June 17, 2015, Roof walked into Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston. The church is one of the oldest black congregations in the US, and that day, it was holding a Bible study session. Roof sat with the group for nearly an hour. Then, he pulled out a gun and opened fire. 9 people were killed, including the church pastor, who was also a state senator. Roof was arrested the next day. He confessed, telling investigators he'd hoped to start a race war. He was charged with 33 federal crimes, including hate crimes and obstruction of religious freedom. In 2017, he was sentenced to death. In a separate state case, he pleaded guilty to murder and got 9 life sentences. While awaiting trial, Roof was attacked by another inmate but wasn't seriously hurt. Despite everything, he has never shown remorse. He still stands by his beliefs and often refuses to cooperate with his lawyers.
At this historic black church, families of the 9 people he's accused of murdering at a Bible study sat in shock as an FBI agent testified that Roof went and staked out their church several times in the months before the killings. Police say a GPS device in Roof's car shows he drove from his home in Columbia to the church in Charleston in December of 2014, twice in February the next year, again in April, and then twice in May.
Today, Roof sits on federal death row in Indiana. There's no date set for his execution, and he continues to appeal his sentence, but his place on death row remains unchanged. Number 5. Daniel Lewis Lee was a known white supremacist from Yukon, Oklahoma. He had a rough childhood, marked by abuse and run-ins with the law. By the time he was in his early 20s, he had already served time for robbery. In 1995, he joined a racist group that believed in creating a whites-only nation.
Lewis Lee, who was convicted of killing an Arkansas family, including an 8-year-old girl, died by lethal injection after an early morning Supreme Court ruling allowed the execution to move forward. President Trump has long said he wanted to revive the federal death penalty.
A year later, Lee and another member of the group, Chevy Kehoe, carried out a brutal crime. They targeted a family in Arkansas, William Mueller, his wife Nancy, and her 8-year-old daughter, Sarah. They tied them up, used plastic bags and tape to suffocate them, and dumped their bodies in water. They also stole guns and cash to fund their cause. Lee was arrested and put on trial. In 1999, he was sentenced to death. Kehoe got life in prison. Lee would spend over 20 years on death row. His execution was delayed several times. Lawyers raised concerns about how the drugs would affect him. Even the victims' families spoke out, saying they preferred he'd serve life instead of being killed. But the government pushed forward.
In addition to Lee, the Department of Justice says 4 other men will be executed by January 2021. 29 states still have the death penalty. One study shows since 1976, 166 people on death row have been exonerated.
On July 14, 2020, Daniel Lewis Lee was strapped to a gurney at the federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. He received a lethal injection, becoming the first person to face a federal execution in 17 years. His last words were a denial of guilt. The case sparked debate. Some saw it as justice, and others saw it as a mistake. Either way, Daniel Lewis Lee was gone. Number 4. James Ford Seal was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, involved in the brutal kidnappings and murder of 2 African-American teenagers, Henry Hezekiah D. and Charles Eddie Moore, in 1964.
Reputed Ku Klux Klan leader James Ford Seal, serving 3 life sentences for his role in a 1964 abduction and killing. Seal has been acquitted of the charges, stemming from a 2007 conviction on kidnapping and conspiracy.
The victims were suspected by Seal and his Klan associates of participating in civil rights activities, which led to their abduction in Meadville, Mississippi on May 2, 1964. Seal, along with fellow Klansman Charles Marcus Edwards, beat Dee and Moore with sticks before chaining them to heavy objects and drowning them in the Mississippi River. Despite initial investigations, the case went cold for decades, and no one was held accountable for the killings. In 2005, a new investigation was launched. Seal was arrested in 2007 and convicted of kidnapping and conspiracy in June of the same year. The court sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms in August 2007. However, his conviction faced a brief setback in 2008 due to a statute of limitations issue, but it was reinstated a year later by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Mississippi, May 2, 1964. Their bodies later pulled from the Mississippi River. Seal's attorney argued the statute of limitations in the case had expired.
Seal spent his remaining years incarcerated at the Federal Correctional Institute in Terre Haute, Indiana. On August 2, 2011, he died in prison, serving his sentence until the end. His conviction marked the first and only prosecution related to the murders of Dee and Moore, providing much-needed justice to the victims' families. Number 3. Edgar Ray Klin was a former Ku Klux Klan leader and Baptist preacher in Neshoba County, Mississippi. He was responsible for one of the most infamous acts of racial violence in the American South during the Civil Rights Movement. In 1964, Klin played a key role in the murders of 3 civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner. These men were part of a group working to register African American voters and investigating the burning of a black church in the area. Klin, deeply involved in the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, planned their abduction, shooting, and burial.
Edgar Ray Klin bears the signs of his 89 years. His hands are still scarred and rough from decades in the East Mississippi sawmills. He has a muscular build, even as he maneuvers in his wheelchair. Klin was interviewed on Monday by the Associated Press inside the Mississippi State Penitentiary.
The bodies were discovered 44 days later, leading to national outrage and a federal investigation. The killing sparked widespread attention and fueled the movement for civil rights and justice in the South. Klin's first trial took place in 1967, but the jury couldn't reach a verdict and he walked free. For nearly 4 decades, he avoided conviction. However, in 2005, after tireless efforts from journalists, activists, and family members of the victims, the case was reopened. At the age of 80, Klin was retried and convicted of 3 counts of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison, which essentially amounted to a life sentence, given his age.
It was his first interview since his conviction on state charges of manslaughter in 2005, 41 years to the day after James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner were killed and buried in a red clay dam. In his interview with the AP, Klin said he has never and will never talk about the events that became immortalized in the film Mississippi Burning.
During his time in prison, Klin remained unrepentant, continuing to express racist views and showing no remorse for his role in the murders. His death in 2018, at the age of 92, marked the end of his long life, but his conviction served as a hard-won victory for justice. Number 2. Frazier Glenn Miller Jr., also known as Frazier Glenn Cross, was a notorious white supremacist who led the Carolina Knights of the Ku Klux Klan and later founded the White Patriot Party. Born in 1940 in North Carolina, Miller served as a Green Beret in the U.S. Army before becoming disillusioned with the military's integration policies. His growing extremism led him to form the Carolina Knights of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1980s, which later became the White Patriot Party. These groups were involved in paramilitary activities, including cross burnings, stockpiling weapons, and threatening civil rights leaders.
Action State of Kansas versus Frazier Glenn Cross Jr., 14 CR 853. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of capital murder as charged in Count 1.
In 1967, Miller was arrested for conspiring to assassinate Morris Dees, the founder of Southern Poverty Law Center, and for violating court orders prohibiting paramilitary activities. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. After serving his sentence, Miller continued his hate-fueled campaign, openly promoting violence and discrimination. On April 13, 2014, Miller carried out a shooting spree at 2 Jewish sites at Overland Park, Kansas. His victims were not Jewish, but Miller targeted them due to his anti-Semitic beliefs. He killed 3 people, 2 at the Jewish Community Center, and 1 at the nearby village Shalom Retirement Community. When arrested, Miller shouted Heil Hitler and later expressed no remorse, claiming he'd been floating on a cloud since the killings. Miller represented himself during his trial, making inflammatory statements and gestures, including a Nazi salute in court. He was convicted of capital murder, attempted murder, assault, and firearms charges, leading to a death sentence by lethal injection. He was held at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas while awaiting execution. However, Miller's death did not come through execution. On May 3, 2021, at the age of 80, he died in prison from natural causes. Though his death was initially believed to be from natural causes, an autopsy was performed to confirm the exact cause. Despite his violent and hateful life, Miller's death passed without the public execution he had long faced as punishment. Number 1. Henry Francis Hayes was a member of the Ku Klux Klan in Alabama, involved in the brutal 1981 lynching of 19-year-old Michael Donald. The murder was a racist act of retaliation following a mistrial in the case of a black man accused of killing a white police officer. Hayes, along with accomplice James Tiger Knowles, kidnapped Donald, beat him senseless, slit his throat, and hanged his body from a tree. The crime went unsolved for over 2 years until Michael Donald's mother, Belua Mae Donald, took matters into her own hands. Her relentless pursuit of justice led to the FBI's involvement and the eventual identification of the perpetrators.
Civilians Henry Hayes and James Knowles were convicted of that murder. Hayes was executed. Knowles is serving a life sentence. The museum in Montgomery documents more than 4,000 cases of lynching up until 1950. Donald's murder is not cataloged.
In 1983, Henry Hayes was convicted of capital murder. While the jury recommended life imprisonment, the judge overruled them, sentencing Hayes to death. 14 years later, in 1997, Hayes was executed by the electric chair. His execution marked a historic moment. He became the first white person in Alabama to be executed for a white-on-black crime since 1913.
Favorite missionary work, just going out and beating up black people. And when they beat them up, they tell them, you say anything, the police are Klan, and we'll come back and kill you. So this was the atmosphere. And the leadership, Robert Shelton was a smooth guy. He never got caught explicitly telling these people to go out and murder. So that was the difficult task that Morris Dees had. There wasn't a RICO statute where you could have this criminal enterprise and go after all of them at that point.
Leading up to his death, Hayes confessed to the murder, admitting the Klan's involvement and stating that they'd ordered the killing to assert their dominance in Alabama. In the aftermath of the case, Belua Mae Donald won a $7 million wrongful death lawsuit against the United Klans of America, bankrupting the organization and setting a powerful legal precedent for holding hate groups accountable for their actions. What's your opinion of the death sentence? Is any crime deserving of it? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, like, comment, and subscribe for more videos just like this.